our town clerk for Corte Madera. I wonder if you might call a roll for all present. Okay, now.
Thank you, sir. We'll start with Larkspur. Councilmember Chu.
Here.
Councilmember Hilmer. Councilmember Morrison.
Here.
Vice Mayor Carroll.
Here.
Mayor White.
Here.
And Corte Madera. Councilmember Andrews.
Here.
Councilmember Condon. Here. Councilmember Laffer.
Here.
Vice Mayor First. Here. Mayor White.
Here. Very good, thank you. Would everybody please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Great, thank you. Okay, next we have an open time for public discussion. This is for something that is not on the agenda. If any member of the public would like to be heard, please step to the podium, state name and residence, and you've got 3 minutes. Thank you very much.
Hi, Pat Lavazio, 427 Oakdale Avenue. I bumped into Catherine Way on the bike path this morning, and we were admiring how nice and quiet it was without all the school traffic. And that led to a conversation about traffic, and I would just like to say that we really need a joint group from the schools and our towns and our parents to get together and solve this problem. And it may very well be school buses. A few years back, the Twin Cities did a bus service, and it was a little shuttle that ran around, but they did it mostly for the older people, and they shut it down at 3 in the afternoon, and they never ran it for the school kids. And I always thought, wow, that was a missed opportunity. I understand that those buses are still there, and we might be able to just bring them out and give it a try. Tiburon is a great town to look at in terms of what they have done. They found out that keeping a really simple route and just keeping the bus going so the kids knew that during like 7 to 9 and then 3 to 5 that there was just this shuttle running through. Took a lot of cars off the road in Tiburon. So I think we can do that here in Corte Madera and Larkspur, and I think it's going to take both councils to make it happen. And I have several other things on my list, but I don't want to take up too much time tonight. And I know someone's got a clock. Am I at 3 minutes yet? All right, one more thing then. As far as the planning problem, both councils have seen how residents really care and really show up when it comes to their sense that we're being overdeveloped and overbuilt. The station area plan at Larkspur Landing was a great example. I think 400 people showed up one night, and in Corte Madera they showed up in other ways. And I really think if the towns got together and created a citizens, community panel, advisory panel to you guys, so that they knew what was going on when applications came in, and we don't have to wait for everyone to get all mad, but they could kind of know ahead of time. And I think you could develop a really great working relationship that would also give us maybe a little more clout when it comes to standing up to some of these state laws, which put both of our councils on the defensive. We're always doing what the state wants us to do. And I think some kind of community development task force could start setting some priorities and do some proactive thinking for both towns that would make the residents really happy. Or at least this resident. I don't speak for everybody. Anyway, thank you very much. And thank you for all you're doing. There's great stuff happening in town. And I would go into all that, but I won't. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pat. And just for the benefit of those who may not have been in any public meetings before, please be aware that although we appreciate the comments of public overtime, we as councils are not supposed to engage in discussion with them because it hasn't been part of the notice agenda. It's not that we don't have comments or things that we may be thinking, but unless it's on part of the regularly noticed agenda, we don't engage in discussion at this time on these new matters. Please.
Bob Bundy, 89 Golden Passage, Corte Madera. Outside of traffic and housing units, the other contentious issue in our towns seems to be noise issues. And I've attended the Corte Madera discussion about noise ordinances, and I know it's been very heated in other communities. What I would really like to advocate is for Corte Madera, Larkspur, and San Anselmo to get together and review their noise ordinance, particularly in regard to strictly eliminating the use of gas-powered leaf blowers. I would like to eventually see the elimination of gas-powered weed eaters and hedge trimmers equipment, and most of them seem to use still chainsaws, hedge trimmers, and such. Still now has a battery backpack that weighs 15 pounds that can hold a charge up all day and be used on all of the equipment. Wouldn't make sense on chainsaws, but for all of the other equipment, it would be useful. I would like to see us look at some kind of planning that would work. Say that Selmo limits gas-powered leaf blowers from 1 to 4, 3 days a week. Tiburon has eliminated them completely. Belvedere has eliminated them completely. Mill Valley has eliminated them completely. I believe that because of the new technology, this would not be a hardship on the commercial landscapers. And so even if we had a different phase-in for commercial versus residential, we could still see the elimination of these in residential areas and potentially commercial areas over a period of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Next.
I got to crosswords from 73 Lakeside.
You'll call, I think that mic's working.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. Crosswords from 73 Lakeside, Corte Madera. Many of you know me. I've been in front of the Corte Madera Council a couple of times on the leaf blower issue. I'm not going to repeat everything Bob has said. I agree with it all. It's pretty thorough. My efforts were low energy and trying to figure out if we're going to go high energy on this. But just in a low energy sense, just putting things out next to some of the goings on in our meetings. I got 21 responses of people who eagerly want to ban at a minimum on gas blowers. And there's others in the room will talk about some of the responses out of Larkspur is very low energy by itself. I guess what I'm trying to think about here is how did someone in the council take leadership on this? It's a lot of energy on our parts, we all work to respect that, but I keep kind of hearing the onus is on us to get petitions to do all this. I appreciate that, but for people to just click a box and do something very simple, we got great response, and we went out and we get a greater response. So I guess I would encourage the council members to, speak to your neighbors, speak to your constituents, get out there and talk about this. As Bob said, it's accepted and banned in many places across the country as well. So I guess I'm looking for some leadership. I'm willing to put some energy into this. I think a lot of people care. I think the vast majority care. And outweigh those who I don't. But that's kind of where I'm at. And just hope we can see some energy here and push forward with this thing very much.
Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Laura Ethel, on the street in Larkspur. I'm the one who posted the notice next door asking whether people in our various neighborhoods would be supportive of a ban on gas-powered leaf blowers. I got more than 50 responses. From Larkspur, 38 people said they would favor such a ban. One person said he would not. And I think this is representative of sentiment in Larkspur about these things. I had spoken with Neil Todd in Larkspur about noise regulations after we got that spotted owl advisory. And Neil told me that the city had no ability to enforce anything about that, about all the noise that appeared to be a violation of federal law. But the city of Larkspur certainly couldn't enforce it. So that's what prompted me to post this on next door. And I will see to it that this is brought up again, at least at Thank you. Oh, and by the way, I'm very happy you're talking about the combination of the fire departments. I think they work great for the police department, and I look forward to seeing what you do with fire. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Council members, Phyllis Melendez, 215 Prince Royal Drive, Corte Madera. I'm going to change the topic to another one of our senses. We've been talking about our sense of hearing. I'm going to talk about our sense of sight. I've been to planning and heard watched video council meetings lately, And I'm disturbed because both seem to be talking about that it's okay to block a homeowner's view when somebody nearby wants to build a larger home. And saying that view is not that important, and if you don't see it from your living room, well, you can go to another part of your property and see it. I'm saying view is very important. And one of the main things you'll hear realtors talk about, location, 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 and part of that location is your view. So to say that it's okay for someone to lose their view simply because somebody else wants to increase the size of their home, I think is not okay. And that needs to be addressed in a very different way from what I'm hearing presented or responded to when people present their dismay that it's okay for someone to take something that they paid for and that will decrease the property value of their home and also just the quality of what they purchased. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would any other member of the public like to be heard? Seeing none, I will close public time and move on in the agenda to our third item, which is a single presentation we have. I understand Jim Irving will be presenting. Jim, would you mind when you begin introducing our friends at the table over there as well?
Well, I'd be happy to.
Okay.
Mayors, members of the council, this kind of intimidating you guys all the way over there.
Thanks,
You're
Todd.
court, so.
It's like a volleyball game.
All right, I'll try to do my best. I wanted to start off, I wanted to introduce retired Southern Marin Fire Chief Jim Irving to you all. He has 37 years of fire experience. He's a highly, highly respected person in public safety amongst all of us chiefs. Think the world of him. He has actually made major contributions to the Central Marin Police Authority and Twin Cities Police Authority over the years as we relied on him in best practices approach of how to run an organization serving multiple communities. And so it's a great honor to have him here. He is a key point for tonight and really next steps. So we're excited for him to give you a PowerPoint presentation tonight. He's given this PowerPoint presentation not only to the management team, but to all fire employees as well as our ad hoc committee. And something I really appreciated, and I think you will too, he has a great way of simplifying things for us to understand definitions and the importance of why fire departments do what they do. And so I'm excited to have him here. I know our managers need no introduction, but Dave Bracken, our town manager of Corte Madera, is here. Dan Schwartz, our Larkspur city manager, is to my right. Todd Cusimano, I'm the police chief of Central Marin Police Authority. Glenn Berkheimer is to my left. He is our labor expert, and we'll talk about him in a little bit. And our new fire chief, Scott Schertz, is also here.
Thank you, Todd, very much.
Thank you. I hope I can live up to that great introduction. Good evening, mayors, vice mayors, council members. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak with you tonight. As Todd mentioned, Jim Irving, 37 years in the fire service. I currently work for Regional Government Services, RGS, which you guys are a member of, and I'm employed through RGS to do this study for you. So I'll go ahead and get started here. Kind of the agenda that I'm going to talk about tonight is a general overview, a background methodology of where we got to this, the goals, then fire agency comparisons, management administration overview, then potential staffing models, and then operational response, our staffing for that, response times and coverage, and then a general discussion for the council. To start off, sort of an overview as we came about this because of the retirements of Chief Sprain and Chief Sennett. And it gave the two agencies an opportunity to look at things and possibly do something a little different. Given the town of Corte Madera and its size and the city of Larkspur and its size and the number of people on duty, they're really functionally dependent upon each other. Neither agency has enough people on duty to properly attend to a fire of any magnitude, by themselves, and also meet national standards. So the process that I use to look at this is one that was developed by the Center for Public Safety Excellence, Commission on Fire Accreditation. And it's called Standards of Cover, and the short term for that is SEPSI. The town of Corte Madera went through a full SEPSI Standards of Cover about 10 years ago. And Larkspur has never done that, but the views of the former chief, Bob Sennett, was that it really didn't make a difference because there was really no opportunity to change anything. And both views are valid. You know, I sort of took a different approach of sort of doing a light version of that because we do have an opportunity to change things. The process I used was interview stakeholders. That included key council members, data analysis, looking at response times, number of calls, response times for calls, etc. Identify issues by talking with the firefighters, identifying desired outcomes, and then we're at that point of proposing solutions and then hopefully implementing change. Ultimately, you as the councils will make the decision. But that has to involve other government agencies, including neighboring fire jurisdictions, the Ross Valley Paramedic Authority, and then your stakeholders. And those stakeholders are your citizens and your employees, the firefighters themselves. In order for anything to be successful, you need to get buy-in from all these different groups of people. Our goals are to improve the service, organizational efficiency, fiscal savings, and long-term stability. The process goal here, from my perspective, is not to tell you what you need to do, but rather to provide you with the information that you need in order to make an informed decision and for you to better understand what it is your fire department does and what are the issues are and how to best serve your communities. Starting off with fire agency comparisons. Can you turn down the lights? Someone was going to turn down the lights up here only. That would be nice. There he goes. Thank you. No single measure of comparison is a standard for comparing agencies. You know, every community in Marin is a little bit different. They have unique areas and diverse challenges, and community expectations vary between communities. So if we look at average population per station, I have no PowerPoint pointer, but you look at the different agencies, and you see that Novato, the population per station is in the 12,000 range. As you work down, you see where Larkspur and Corte Madera are more on the lower end of the spectrum, where they're not serving as many people per station. Perfect. Average population per firefighter per on-duty firefighter. Again, you see the larger departments, Novato, San Rafael, Ross Valley, have fewer firefighters per population, meaning they're somewhat more efficient. But again, you're sometimes comparing apples and oranges because those communities have denser populations. So it's not always a good judge of the efficiency of a department. Next, we have average square miles served per agency. Again, your larger departments are serving generally more square miles. Obviously, Marin County, because it serves a predominantly rural area, has a very large square mileage. But again, you see Larkspur and Corte Madera are sort of on the lower end here. There seems to be all within the Ross Valley, there's a large number of stations for the area. Average responses per station, again, your larger departments are up towards the top. You'll also see that departments that run ambulances tend to be a little higher here. When we look at responses versus incidents, an incident is a number of unique incidents within a jurisdiction versus response being the number of units responding regardless of jurisdiction. So, for example, you may have a medical call where you have both an engine and an ambulance responding, say, within Corte Madera. That would be one incident, but generates two responses. When we look at budget comparisons, we're only looking at Larkspur and Corte Madera here. You see that Larkspur is approximately $4 million, Corte Madera a little over $5 million. But when we look at the actual cost to taxpayers, or the general revenue costs, you'll see that Larkspur is slightly, still about the same. They get about $129,000 back through the Ross Valley Paramedic Authority. That's reimbursement for costs associated with providing paramedics, etc. Conversely, Corte Madera gets back about $1.3 million for ambulance transports. So if you look at the cost per capita, they're not that different. So there's actually a lot of similarity between the two agencies. Then we look at the management overview of the two agencies. And one of the things we need to look at is not only where are we now, but where have we been in the past? And when we look at the current staffing for the two agencies, Corte Madera has a fire chief, or actually had a fire chief, 3 battalion chiefs, one of those being vacant. Larkspur has a fire chief, no battalion chiefs, for a total of 5 chief officers. But if you look back to 2008, prior to the downturn in the economy, you'll see that you actually had 7 chief officers. So you're operating with fewer chief officers today than you were, just 8 years ago. And so the question is, how does that play out in what you do? And we'll talk about that in a minute. So let's look at a standard for fire service administration. Generally, you're going to have a fire chief. You're going to have some type of administrative aid for the fire chief, a fire marshal, and that can be either a safety position or a non-safety position. A safety position meaning that this person is a firefighter as well and can be counted on, during emergency situations, versus non-safety meaning essentially they're a fire inspector. They do the work of the fire marshal, but they can't actually respond to emergencies. And then you'll have a battalion chief coordinating 3 different shifts. So let's talk about each of these positions and what they do. So first off, the fire chief is responsible for your overall department operations and administration. They develop the budget, control expenditures, analyze and forecast future costs. They plan and implement fire and EMS programs, and then they develop and implement organizational policy, Basically, they respond to the community expectations. They deal with community issues, and then if there's personnel issues, they also have to deal with personnel issues. So basically, they're the guy that's responsible for everything. Let's look at fire prevention. Fire prevention has a lot of duties that a lot of people don't see normally. And that includes your fire engineering, your plan review and code adoption, inspection services, code enforcement, environmental management, CUPA, pre-fire plans, vegetation management, WUI, which is Wildland Urban Interface. Everyone's probably heard that phrase around here. Fire investigations, and then lastly, public education. Currently, neither agency has a strong fire prevention program. And in large, that's due to the fact that you've reduced, by 2 people, the number of chief officers within your organization. And I'll talk about that a little more in a bit. So battalion chiefs, one of the things that when I first met with council members, there was a real concern about, why do we have battalion chiefs? And are they really necessary? So let's talk about what is the role of a battalion chief. So battalion chief basically has 3 different roles. One is, what we always think of a battalion chief as they're the on-scene incident commander. And anytime you have a fire, you have an accident on a freeway, hazardous materials response, any type of accident with extrication or rescue, or any incident where you have multiple units responding to it, you have a battalion chief there to establish incident command and make sure that the scene is run efficiently and safely and make sure that everything gets done the way it's supposed to do. One of the things that the battalion chief does is they stand back and look at the entire scene rather than, running in and fighting the fire. They're the person who stands back to make sure everything is going as planned, look at the larger, broader perspective. They also play the role of shift manager, and that involves essentially managing a shift and supervising people. That includes the coordination of all the stations that you have, implementation of goals and objectives, establishing shift priorities, mentorship for your captains, and then discipline dealing with personnel issues, and then ensuring that the agency is adhering to the policies. And then the third responsibility that battalion chiefs have are what we call either staff or administrative assignments. And quite often battalion chiefs, particularly in small agencies such as Corte Madera and Larkspur, battalion chiefs play a role of taking on program management for significant programs in the agency. That would be support or logistics, training or operations, disaster management or fire prevention. And so those are what your battalion chiefs do for you. So it's not just the guy who responds to the fire out there. They also have a big role outside of that. So what does it look like currently in Corte Madera has 3 battalion chiefs. Unfortunately, with the staffing issues in Corte Madera right now, the battalion chiefs spend a majority of their time working as an engine company officer. Typically, a battalion chief is in their own vehicle. But what happens in Corte Madera, because of the staffing constraints, the battalion chief winds up being part of the actual engine company, a 3-person engine company. As a result, they wind up not being able to do either job efficiently. So they're trying to do the role as a battalion chief, trying to do the role as an engine company officer, and they can't really do either one efficiently. And this is not only applies to emergency operations, but it also to their day-to-day operations and their administrative assignments. Let me give you an example. If a battalion chief goes to a fire and they're riding on the engine instead of working, as a battalion chief in a separate vehicle, they get to the fire and they need to make a decision whether they're going to be an engine company officer or they're going to be a battalion chief. So if they take the role of battalion chief, then essentially what they're doing is their engine crew is now being broken up. So what was 3 people is now 2 people. And that means that there's now 2 people with no real supervisor going into a fire. And so that's, could be potentially dangerous. Conversely, if they decide to play the role of engine company officer, then there's no one to establish command. And then that command gets passed. And it may get passed, and then you have a 2-person engine company arrives, and then that officer needs to make a very similar decision. He needs to either take command or he needs to, go in with his crew, and then he passes command. So what you end up with is your command getting passed continually and no one ever establishing that overall view, that overall larger perspective. Same thing occurs with the day-to-day operations or the administrative functions. So if a battalion chief has a responsibility for, say, training or logistics, he's got to balance out that responsibility with the day-to-day responsibility of, doing the things that an engine company does. Go out and do training, go out and do hydrant maintenance, go out and do whatever it happens to be. So again, they're constantly having to weigh out these 2 different things, which are very divergent views. In Larkspur, the Larkspur Battalion Chief is provided by by San Rafael. From an operational perspective, this works fairly well. The San Rafael Battalion Chiefs are very qualified, they respond and are able to take control of incidents, and so it works well. However, they don't really provide any direct management or supervision to the stations, nor do they have any staff or administrative functions for the city of Larkspur. So that tends to leave this large void of stuff that needs to be done. In the past, Larkspur had a deputy chief, and that deputy chief was able to pick up a lot of that stuff. With no deputy chief now for the city of Larkspur, a lot of that stuff gets pushed down to the captain level. So essentially, the captains in Larkspur are dealing with a lot of the same issues that the battalion chiefs in Corte Madera are. They have all these responsibilities, yet they're conflicted with, you know, their day-to-day responsibilities as an engine company officer. So let's look at battalion chief response throughout Marin County. And how does Corte Madera and Larkspur relate to other agencies with battalion chiefs? So if you look at Tiburon, what I did is I went back and looked at dispatch records and figured out all the responses that occurred which battalion chief would have responded to. Tiburon, which operates its own battalion chief, responded to a total of 54 incidents over, I think this is 2015. They also oversee 2 stations and 5 personnel. Not a very busy battalion chief. Ross Valley responded to basically 104 within Ross Valley and then 12 within Kentfield for a total of 116. They oversee, technically they oversee 4 stations, but if you include Kentfield, it's 5. And then again, 8 people that they oversee in Ross Valley, 3 in Kentfield for a total of 11. But the battalion chiefs in Ross Valley are not really supervising the Kentfield firefighters. They're just providing response for that. Then you have Mill Valley and Southern Marin jointly operate a battalion chief. So they have an agreement where on certain days Mill Valley provides the battalion chief, on certain days Southern Marin Fire provides the battalion chief. Now you look at their call totals, a total of 336 calls for 1 year. They have 5 stations and 22 people on duty. In addition, they also respond to Marin County, Marin City, and Throckmorton Ridge for operational battalion chief. Again, that brings their calls up to about 390. There's 2 stations and 5 additional people, but they're not technically responsible for those people, just for the calls. You look at Marin County Fire Department, 197 responses, 6 stations, 20 people on duty. San Rafael, and this excludes currently their agreement with Larkspur, just for the sake of numbers here. San Rafael, 342 responses, 8 stations, 23 personnel. And then Novato, 386 responses, 5 stations, 22 people. So if you look at Larkspur and Corte Madera and how they relate in terms of numbers, basically within Corte Madera and Larkspur, you would have a little over 100 calls, very similar to Ross Valley, 4 stations, again similar to Ross Valley, and then 10 personnel on duty, again very similar to Ross Valley. So for Corte Madera and Larkspur to operate a battalion chief is not out of the question. You know, it seems very prudent. So let's look at potential staffing models for Larkspur and Corte Madera. The first model we looked at is essentially just a Larkspur Corte Madera standalone agency. So that being some type of a fire services board involving Corte Madera Town Council, Larkspur Town Council, fire chief, administrative aide, fire marshal, 3 battalion chiefs overseeing all 4 stations. Another option is a Larkspur Corte Madera Management Command from an outside agency. So you could contract with San Rafael, Southern Marin, Ross Valley, whoever, to basically run your fire department. That would include a fire chief, administrative aide, fire marshal, and then 3 battalion chiefs from contracted agencies. You could do something along the same vein, except have a fire chief and the administration fire marshal provided by an outside agency, but have internal battalion chiefs. So you have your own battalion chiefs within Larkspur and Corte Madera. And then you could also flip that so that you have your battalion chiefs provided by another agency. So you would have a Larkspur Corte Madera fire chief, Larkspur Corte Madera fire marshal, but then contract with one of your neighboring agencies to provide battalion chief coverage. So let's look at where that takes us. We're moving forward, although the four alternative models are presented, it's only likely that one will be achieved in a timely fashion. And that's the first one we looked at, the Larkspur Corte Madera standalone agency. While some of the others may ultimately be more cost effective, because they involve multiple agencies, they'll likely require additional time to vet potential issues. As you add additional agencies, that's going to add complexity in negotiating agreements, in standardizing labor memorandums of understanding, and it has the potential to create political concerns. So if we focus on the easiest model, we have the greatest potential for success. Now, in doing this though, this doesn't preclude us from continuing to consider potential models in the future. So basically what we're saying here is we're going to take a step forward. It may not be the ultimate step, but it's a step in the right direction, and it could potentially help us get to where we want to go. So let's talk about operational staffing. There's some external influences to operational staffing. One being NIOSH and OSHA. NIOSH is the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. The other is OSHA, and that's the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. I think everyone knows that. They have what's called the 2-in, 2-out rule. And we'll talk more about that. And then NFPA. NFPA Standard 1710, Deployment Standards. And then NIST, the National Institute for Safety and Technology. And then ICMA, the International City Managers Association. We'll talk about each of these. First, let's talk about NIOSH and OSHA. Section 29 CFR California, or the Code of Federal Regulations requires that when firefighters enter an IDLH, or immediately dangerous to life and health atmosphere, that they enter in teams of 2. It also requires that 2 additional firefighters be available to rescue the first team. So we're looking at 4 people right there. So let's look at how that looks in terms of how we respond. The reality is most often it involves 5 people, because you're going to have 2 inside, 2 prepared to do rescue, and then 1 operating the pump at the engine. So what that means is, in order to effectively fight any fire, we have to have two people inside, 2 outside, 1 at the engine. Now technically you can do this with 4 if this person here is close enough to this to be able to respond very rapidly. But when you look at the terrain in Larkspur and Corte Madera, that's not very common. How often is it that you have the street right in front of your house where the firefighters could immediately respond to get into the house? Typically you're up flights of stairs, driveways, etc. NFPA 1710. NFPA is the National Fire Protection Association. Standard 1710 stipulates that 4 people on scene within the first 4 minutes, and then 14 to 16 people on scene within 8 minutes. And how that looks is engine company deployment will arrive within 4 minutes travel time to 90% of incidents. Initial arriving companies should have the capability to implement initial rapid intervention crew. That's the 2 out we talked about. And then have the capability to deploy initial full alarm assignment within 8 minutes to 90% of all incidents. So what does that look like in terms of a standard house fire? So a 2,000 square foot 2-story home, you're going to need an incident commander, You're going to need water supply, so an engine operator, establish of 2 hand lines, 2 people on each hand line, 1 support person for each hand line. As hand lines go into houses, you need someone there feeding that line into the people inside. Search and rescue team of 2 people. So that's people who actually go inside and try to find injured occupants or downed people. Team of 2 for ground ladders. When we fight a fire, one of the things we want to do is we want to ventilate. So that means we cut a hole in the roof of the building so that all the trapped gases and heat can escape out the top, so that the firefighters inside can find the seat of the fire and extinguish it. If an aerial is used, an aerial ladder, that's essentially a ladder truck. You have to have 1 more person to take that, and then establish an IRIC of 2 people. So that's your 2 out again. So here in Larkspur and Corte Madera, you run both combination of 2-person and 3-person engine companies. And I know that it's been an issue in the past that has been discussed. The National Institute for Safety and Standards Technology looked at how it looks for 2-person versus 3-person versus 4-person versus 5-person engine companies. And we're going to focus on the difference between 2-person and 3-person engine companies. And what they did is they took standard, fire ground operations and timed groups of firefighters doing these operations. And so what they came up with is the differences here between 2-person and 3-person. To effectively breach a door, that's to open up a door that's locked and get inside of a building. Roughly a minute difference between a 2-person engine company, a 3-person engine company. Getting water onto the fire, again, roughly a minute difference. Making it to an upper fire floor window, about a minute and a half difference. Ground non-fire window, roughly a minute difference. Making it to an upper corner, almost a 2-minute difference in getting to that. Upper front door, roughly a 2-minute difference, and a ground floor window, approximately the same time. So in operating a 2-person engine company, what you are essentially doing is saying that, we're okay with things taking longer, because they are going to take longer. Then they looked at 2-person engine companies in completing primary search. So primary search is when firefighters arrive at a fire building and they believe occupants to be inside the building, they conduct a search. Now, primary search involves searching through the entire house in an attempt to locate any trapped victims. When you look at the times required for a 2-person engine company to do that, you're looking at roughly 12 minutes for a 2-person engine company versus a 3-person engine company, roughly 9 minutes. So you're looking at a 3-minute difference in terms of being able to rescue somebody from a burning building. When NIST looked at the effects of having 2-person versus 3-person engine companies, and then comparing that to fire growth from slow growth to medium growth to fast growth, what they found was that the chances for survivability for 2-person engine company in a fast growth fire was very unlikely. And this number here represents a toxicity as expressed for a fractional effective dose, which essentially is what's known as LD50, or lethal dose for 50. If you may have heard that term before, it's at that dose 50% of the people would die. And so what this is referring to is essentially 1.00 would be LD50. So if we have 1.37%, your LD50 is probably about, or your survivability is probably about 75% chance that you will not survive. So when you look at these fast growth fires and two-person engine companies, there's a very good chance that your firefighters are not going to be effectively able to rescue people out of those buildings. From a practical standpoint, how do we meet that 5 personnel in order to effectively deal with our 2 in, 2 out? In order to meet that, in Corte Madera, we have 3 people on the engine and we have 2 people on the ambulance. That gives us that 5 people. In Larkspur, we have 3 people on engine 16, which is the engine over off of Barrie in Bon Air area. And then downtown Larkspur has only 2 people on the engine. So you can get those 5 people by having 2 engines on scene. The place where we run into problems is if, for example, a 2-person engine company arrives and the ambulance arrives with only 2 people. So you only have 4 people. So you really don't have enough people to create that 2 in, 2 out. Let's talk about response times and coverage. What we have here is a satellite view of Corte Madera, Larkspur. I don't know how well those show up. We talked about that 4-minute response time as called for by NFPA, the National Fire Protection Association. This is a 4-minute response time for Station 13, which is East Corte Madera. And hopefully this map will show up a little better here. This is overlaid with actual incidents from 2015. So if you look at Station 13, which is the one on Paradise Drive, it can make it out almost to Paradise K, can make it to everywhere in East Corte Madera, and over in this area up to basically the base of Summit going up the hill or Christmas Tree Hill. Can also make it up to the area of, what is that, Trader Joe's up there? Station 14, the station right up the street here. If you look at that, can make it over to roughly to where, just a little bit past Station 13 or the East Corte Madera station, all the way up into Larkspur, all the way up to almost to Bon Air Bridge. And then over here to the area of Gold's Gym and Nellen and all that area over there. Downtown Larkspur Station, 4-minute response, brings them down right to the freeway, essentially. Up here all the way over to Kentfield, and out here to Sir Francis Drake by Marin General Hospital. Looking at the response from Station 16 on Barrie. They respond to the entire Greenbrae area up to, again, Station 17 at Kentfield. That's Kentfield Fire. Over here to the Riviera area up to the Redwood High School and all the way up to Magnolia here. And then down here all the way to Tamalpais Drive. Then Kentfield Fire, from their station at Kentfield over at College Marin, they're able to respond down all the way to downtown Larkspur and all the way right to Station 16 or the Barrie Way Station. So when I met with the council members, there was some discussion about closing stations and what that would look like. Because both agencies run at staffing levels that are lower than the NFPA standards, it's likely that personnel from the closed stations would be reassigned. So there would not likely be any large savings from station closures. While there is a potential for some savings, the savings are more long-term related to maintenance costs or the repurposing of the fire station for other city departments, libraries or public works, whatever it happened to be. So if we considered closing stations, let's look at if we were to close Station 13. That's the one over in East Corte Madera. What you see is the response time from the Tamalpais Drive station down in East Corte Madera. Takes it down here, essentially what is that, Granada there, just past the current station. But it leaves some large areas here uncovered, or outside of that 4-minute response time. When we total up the number of calls here, that's about 88 calls per year that would be outside of that 4-minute response time. Looking at the same thing for Station 14 or the one on Tamalpais you closed. Again, you have areas up on Meadow Suite, Chapman Park, Christmas Tree Hill that would be outside of that 4-minute response time. In 2015, or actually in 3 years average, that would have been about 45 calls per year that were outside of the 4-minute response time. We look at closing the downtown Larkspur station. What you see is that the only areas that really would fall outside of that 4-minute response time is up here on the end of Baltimore Canyon, Wilson Way. And when we looked at a 3-year average, we found is that it was about 7 calls per year that would fall out of that 4-minute response. And then if we were to close Station 16, the one on Berry Way, it leaves large areas of Greenbrae and Riviera circle down here outside of that 4-minute response. We looked at a 3-year average, and it's 147 calls per year that would be outside of that 4-minute response. So just to summarize, Station 13, 88 calls per year, or essentially 9.1% of the calls in Corte Madera would be outside of that 4-minute response. Now we talked about, acceptable is 10%. So, NFPA recommends, 4-minute response 90% of the time. If we're essentially saying that we know that 9.1% of the time we're not going to have that 4-minute response, it leaves us very little room for error, on any other calls. Closing Station 14, one Tamalpais Drive, 45 calls, 4.6, roughly, so we have 5% chance of error in order to stay under that 90%, or over that 90% rather. If we look at Larkspur, 1331 calls, Station 15 or downtown Larkspur, 7 calls over, average 3 years. So less than 1% of the calls. Station 16, 147 calls, 11%. So immediately we're already over our 90%. Other considerations, if we're talking about closing stations, and again, I'm not recommending closing stations. It was brought to me by council members. You have to look at your overall response, how it affects your automatic aid agreements, obviously political considerations, historic considerations, the station's been there forever, also target hazards, and then, it's a politically complex thing to talk about closing stations. And prior to doing that, you really need to do a community outreach and involve stakeholders, including, your next door neighbors in terms of other fire departments, to see if they're willing to take on that added burden of response into your area. And with that, I'll open it to questions from the council.
Okay, thank you, Jim. I think typically after the presentation, we would just move on to begin discussion as part of the business item, but if anybody has a question they'd like to ask as part of this presentation phase, please.
I would like you to just elaborate a little bit more on our mutual aid system is this on, by the way? That we have in Marin, so that there's an understanding by the public and by the other councils about how agencies respond to help each other out.
Okay, Marin operates in a functionally consolidated fashion, meaning that every agency in Marin has agreed to back up other agencies. So if there's a fire, the closest resources get dispatched regardless of jurisdiction. So if you have a fire, here, the 3 closest engines will automatically respond. It doesn't matter if it's, Corte Madera, Larkspur, and Mill Valley, Corte Madera, Larkspur, and San Rafael. You're going to get those 3 closest engines automatically. There's no having to request anything. It just all happens via dispatch automatically. The fire chiefs agreed probably 7 or 8 years ago that everyone agreed the closest resource will respond.
Anyone else? I didn't mean to discourage questions. If anybody would like to ask anything, that's great. Go ahead, Daniel.
Thank you, and this might piggyback on what Catherine just said, but that one slide you had that showed the staffing for a full alarm, in fact, if at all possible, it might be handy to be able to take a look at it, but it said that staffing level is 14 to 15. Now, how do other small towns reach that, or is this really a case where the mutual aid comes in, where you gather all the resources from the surrounding community to meet those numbers?
Absolutely. It's very few agencies can meet this on their own, and they almost always rely on mutual aid to do this. Here in Corte Madera, Larkspur, you're going to have both agencies respond. You have between the 2 agencies 10 people on duty. You will also get 3 people from Kentfield more than likely, or on this end you would get it from Mill Valley or Southern Marin, and then you will get probably 2 people on a rescue unit or a paramedic unit from Marin County Fire at Ross. So that will give you your 15.
Thank you.
Very good. Anyone else? Thank you, Jim. We really appreciate that.
Certainly.
I'm going to imagine there's going to be more discussion here in a little bit. Okay. We don't have any items on our consent calendar, so we'll move on from that. We don't have any public hearings, so like lightning, we move to our business item. 6.1, which is a review of the agreement, maybe potential agreement, between Town of Corte Madera and City of Larkspur for shared fire services and discussion of next steps towards sharing services emerging fire departments. So I understand, Todd, you'll be presenting.
Thank you, mayors, members of the council. I'll start this off, and then we have a great team that can jump in at any point.
Let me just ask one question. Can everybody hear Chief Cusimano all right? Anybody who can't, raise your hand. Okay, thank you, Todd.
Okay, can you hear me now? Okay. Okay, thank you. I wanted to start off of, it was really critical to see this PowerPoint presentation for us and to start the conversation. And then to step back and say, what are the next steps? How do we move forward? Because the process and those next steps are so critical to whether this thing succeeds or fails. And I believe we've assembled an amazing team. But again, there's 3 criteria that we've really looked at. The managers have really set forth for us moving forward. And again, it's not to maintain service, find a way to improve it. You want to get our attention, you improve service. And you don't just improve service today, you improve it over the long term. The second one, and Jim touched on it, is long-term fiscal sustainability. We can always show you a short-term savings, and we will, by approving, if you do, this MOU at your respective council meetings after tonight. If you wish to go that way, we're going to save money. We're going to save about $150,000 conservatively over the next fiscal year by doing this. But that's a short-term fix. We want long-term sustainability. And the third thing really is, and Jim touched on this as well, we don't want to close any doors. When you take this first step, it's a difficult one, and it's based on trust, it's based on history, and Corte Madera and Larkspur have a long history together. And we can define that history in different ways, but being in public safety, being part of the Twin Cities Police Authority and Central Marin Police Authority, we have 40 years, almost 40 years of a relationship of providing public safety services to our communities. And I'm proud of it, and I think it's been successful. A couple reasons for that success, and I think you can't do it in an analysis, and you can't do it in a written report. You can't. The strength of a JPA, the authority, the way we are recommending we try to go towards in a consolidation, it's the strength of the authority as a whole. When you have 4 council members, 2 from each side, the strengths that they bring to the table when there's problem solving, when there's something to get done, when you have 2 city town managers working with the chief and the council to problem solve issues, you can't underestimate that. And we've gone through it over 4 decades. And we've always been successful. You go back in the history of the Twin Cities Police Authority, they have never been deadlocked on a vote. They've always figured out a way to make it work. And that's impressive. The other thing that really jumps out at me, and I didn't know if we were going to be successful or not, until I sat in the room first with the command staff of both Corte Madera and Larkspur, but then we had an all-hands meeting and all employees were in that room for about 3 or 4 hours. And we spent some time together and we were honest with each other. And taking people out of their comfort zone in the public sector is not an easy task. And it's one of the reasons why things never happen. And you can have the best ideas in the world. If you don't have the support of the employees, you have nothing. And so really going into this meeting, not knowing how it was going to go, at the end of the 4 hours, I looked at Scotty Schertz and our chief, and I was excited. You have an amazing group of firefighters that are willing to be leaders, put themselves out there, make some change, and do things the right way. And it starts with them, and ultimately this thing is going to be successful because of them. A lot of them that are here, I want to recognize because they've been voted by their peers to be part of this working group. And I just want to talk about them for a second. And our working group, it's similar to the model of Central Marin Police Authority back in 2012, 2013. There's a series of steps that have to be made before it can even get to the ad hoc committee of the council members and ultimately to both respective councils. And you have to problem solve and come towards a transition document to work through all your labor issues. And when we did that for Twin Cities and San Anselmo, Glenn Berkheimer, who's again here today, he's our labor expert. He also provides negotiations for us for Central Marin and for Corte Madera Fire. But he was a key component of building that trust with the labor groups between management and labor. And it wasn't a negotiation, it's a problem-solving session. And I gotta tell you, we have a lot of people define and have a perception of public employees. I gotta tell you, it's a thing of beauty to watch Glenn sit down with the labor groups and see them problem solve and actually agree to pension reforms, agree to doing things the right way, making themselves uncomfortable because it's the right thing. It's amazing, and that process has started. The rest of the working group is, again, Chief Scott Schertz, Pete Davis, Roger Benz, Ryan Day, Don Stasiowski, Nick Gabbard, Kenny Preet, Dan Reese, Kevin Rose, Tom Timmer, and Steve Walton. And so together, over the last few months, we've been meeting at the direction of the ad hoc committee and the managers, and we've been focused on basically joining our command staff, from sharing Chief Schertz at the top, coming up with a testing process, and really joining our command teams of the battalion chiefs and the captains. And so we've done that testing process, we've announced promotions, and now we have merged the entire command staff for both Corte Madera and Larkspur, and we've also are in the process of merging all operations, all personnel at all 4 stations. That's not an easy task, and it was done in a matter of 2 months. And it just goes to show you the talent and the skill that you have with your people. And honestly, if being in public safety and as a chief of police, I'm not afraid, and you all know that, of change and putting yourself out there and changing the model upside down and trying something new. And if that means someone from the outside coming in because they're better at doing it, it's something we're going to consider. I got to tell you, you have the talent in-house to make this great. And so I believe it's a logical step. I think it's the first step for us moving forward to try to make it work between Corte Madera and Larkspur. The other exciting thing is it actually opens doors for us moving forward over the next year, over the next 3, 5, 7, 10 years in the Ross Valley Fire area, Southern Marin, San Rafael. Because now when you have a professional organization and you're able to buy and sell service, you have a talented group, you build a reputation. and it opens opportunity for you to provide opportunity for someone else and for them to provide opportunity for us. Within the staff report on the fiscal analysis, basically in really succinct way of describing it, the shared services agreement basically formalizes what we're talking about of merging our operations for the short term. That's what that does. And by doing that for fiscal year 16-17, we'll realize a conservative approximate savings of about $300,000, $150,000 respectively. That's by sharing personnel. We're just focused on salary benefits of sharing a chief and sharing command staff. There's additional savings to be had in overtime, in line items and redundancies. But here's the thing, we're just starting this. This gives us the opportunity, just like we did in the model with Central Marin Police, to merge our operations and personnel and know that it works in 6 months. Because when we're here in 6 months, there's no guesswork, we're not projecting. We know it works or if it doesn't work. We know if it works personnel-wise, financially, operationally, service delivery. And so we have a great team. I'm very excited to see what they come up with. As we move forward, and Dan can definitely jump in with this, we have some hurdles. You always have hurdles, and we have some issues that we have to work through with CalPERS, but I believe we have the right team to work through those issues, and also with LAFCO. And so there's some fiscal long-term analysis that will have to be done, and so we're going through that process now to evaluate that fiscal analysis. But if you look at, again, on the fiscal analysis page, it's on page 4, we showed you a 12-year trend amongst the Central Marin Police Authority, and the point there is how you control cost. And so when you put your services together and your personnel, in good times, it really helps you provide enhanced service in your communities. And in those tough times, when we have the fiscal crisis every 5 to 8 years, it allows you to options to maintain your service delivery, but keep it at the levels that are acceptable to us in our communities. And we do provide different services in Corte Madera and Larkspur. We understand that, and that's something that we have to work towards over the next 6 months to understand that and fully grasp what we're talking about. But if you look at it, it's exciting. The police authority, again, you can go back 10 fiscal cycles and it's the same cost we pay today. There's a lot of similarities with fire. Some things that we can do in police to save cost, you can't do in fire, but it's the same way with fire comparing it to police. And so there's a lot of opportunities, and my point is we have that relationship, we have a proven track record over 4 decades, and I really wanted to spend some time for council to really explain that, why this step and why not something else. We believe this is the best step to provide us the best bang for our buck, so to speak, the best service delivery, the best opportunity for long-term fiscal savings, and to open doors for us in the future with our friends to the north, south, and west. And so with that, I would be happy to turn it over to Dan or Dave if you want to add anything, or to the council for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Do either of the managers like to add anything?
I just want to thank Chief Cusimano for stepping forward when Dave Brack and I asked him to, and the committee that we've been working with asked him to take a leadership role with Chief Shirts to work with the staff of both agencies. It's really relieved Dave Bracken and me in terms of time so that we can focus in the background on the details and a lot of the minutia that this process is going to take. And Chief Cusimano's just done a yeoman's job carrying that process for us. And I just wanted to publicly acknowledge all the work he's put in, which certainly is above and beyond what we might normally ask of a police chief as we work on a fire merger. But now that he has a different role coming forward in Corte Madera, it sort of all fits in a good piece.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'd just like to accentuate the need for the number of personnel, and I thought Jim did a really good job of explaining that. When I first became manager, I was on site at a fire at the Uplands Apartments off of Paradise Drive, and remember Battalion Chief telling me exactly that and why you need that and seeing it in real life. That was Pete Davis. And It's one thing to see it on the screen here. It's very much another thing to see it in real life, and those personnel are needed for life safety. And again, Jim, thank you for explaining that so well. Also, as a matter of procedure, I guess we want to say we're not asking you to take any action tonight. We expect that would come at a near future council meeting, each of the councils.
Thank you very much, David. Okay, so I think the way that we're going to proceed here, if it's all right with my fellow council members, is that my own practice here is if anybody has on the council a clarifying question for staff, we'll do those first. Then we'll open it to the public for public comment. After public comment, if anybody on the council would like to ask more questions of staff, and then we'll close that part and bring it back for us to discuss a little bit. Is that all right with everybody?
Yep.
All right, let's do that.
That's the way we do it on the other side of the board.
Okay. So are there any clarifying questions of Todd or Jim? By the way, thank you both. As usual, excellent, thorough, prepared preparation. We're all grateful to you for it. Would anybody like to ask clarifying questions of anything to date? Sure. I'm going to start with our friends at Larkspur. Larry, go for it.
Thank you. Is this on? Yeah. One of the things that Chief Cusimano mentioned is that the budget has stayed flat pretty much for Twin Cities Police, Central Marin Police. And I think one of the things that, he hasn't emphasized is that under that old command structure and organization, we did not have a full-service police department. So the things that we do have now are things like, juvenile investigations, records management, evidence management, things like that. I think one of the things we discussed in committee that I think would be beneficial to the public as well as other council members is, to better articulate what does it mean now to be potentially a full-service fire department.
Thank you, Larry.
Well, one of the things that Jim touched on was the difference between having battalion chiefs that sometimes ride on the fire engine as a company officer and sometimes are an independent resource. That is one of the things that working together we can address. We can have a 24/7 dedicated battalion chief to take over incident command functions during an emergency. The other thing that we plan to do is kind of enhance our public education and our fire prevention programs. Currently, in Larkspur, we're using the services of a retired deputy chief fire marshal. We have him for 15 hours a week. So it's not enough to put out the prevention programs that the public expects. So pooling our resources and having a fire marshal able to oversee a prevention and public education program in both towns will be a significant enhancement to our services. And also just all of the economies of scale that come with pooling your resources. We have folks in both agencies that have specialties and areas of expertise that we can capitalize if we work as one. That's just a couple of the examples of what a full-service fire agency can provide.
Thank you. Kevin?
Yeah, and again, thank you all very much for a very interesting and enlightening presentation. This is a great opportunity for our community, and I hope it's successful. Just a couple of quick questions, and Todd, you mentioned very briefly, and it's also in the staff report, some of the challenges that are presented by legislation that enable LAFCO to have something to say about how this organization might shape up, as well as some of the challenges that may be presented by pension reform. And there are uncertainties with both areas, but I wondered if you could maybe elaborate a little bit more on both of those and the extent to which you think that that may have a material impact on the direction that we're taking.
She's going to let me take that one. The LAFCO executive officer and I are going to meet next week to talk about what he envisions as a process. The legislation in question was passed last fall and was in response to some transfer of services that occurred in some Southern California agencies against the preferences of the personnel in those agencies. And as a result, legislation was written that mandates that for agencies to do cooperative agreements in fire that involve the agency serving new territory or territory outside of the area they've served before, that the proposed new service arrangement has to go through a third-party independent fiscal analysis. And then that needs to be evaluated by LAFCO, the Local Agency Formation Commission, which, for the benefit of folks who aren't familiar, is made up of elected officials from around the county, 6 elected officials who and a public member who make us up the 7th vote, and they evaluate proposals for restructuring a government. We understand that one process is either underway or near completion down south, and the bill for these studies are fairly high. We've been doing fairly extensive fiscal analysis in-house for this process, so I'd like to talk to the executive officer about what his interpretation of that requirement is and how we might find a way to present to the LAFCO what I think would be more than sufficient information about the financial impact of any proposal we move forward with without us having to hire a 5 or 6 figure consulting firm to validate the work we've been doing for months. That's issue 1 that you asked about. I don't think otherwise that process will be particularly challenging. It's really meeting that requirement in the law. The other one you asked about is the pension reform, and what we've been working on in our team, is most JPAs or other possible ways of merging two departments like this into a new entity. What they've been doing with respect to the new pension rules is going to a legislator and asking for special legislation to establish what the pension formula will be for the new agency, because the pension reform efforts that occurred a few years ago didn't really contemplate this type of scenario where you'd have existing employees of 2 agencies and you'd like them to work together under one umbrella. There are several examples around the state of this special legislation. In fact, there's enough examples that the legislature is anticipated this fall to consider a bill to establish a process so that these special bills don't have to keep coming forward. So we're monitoring that situation closely and hoping perhaps that bill will move forward in a way that we think is favorable to our process, and we won't have to work that political avenue as well.
And that process you'd envision can be accomplished within the same time frame that you're looking to put this organization together?
I think we'll be fine with respect to the timetable. The legislature doesn't like to do single issue special bills, but they do understand from time to time when it's in the best interest of good government, they will move those bills rather quickly.
Thank you. Jim?
So the question from Councilmember Andrews is whether we're going to be able to meet LAFCO's requirements in the timetable, because we're hoping to have resolution on this process by the end of the calendar year. I don't have an answer yet for you about that. It's such a new process that I really think the Marin LAFCO staff will have a significant say in how quickly it can or can't move. I actually have a background in this area of government, and I think, and I'm hoping I can show their staff that there's a path that can occur and meet their requirement and give them comfort within 6 months. But until I have that sit down, I can't answer your question. So.
Thank you. Diane?
Thank you. In the draft agreement, there is a
a provision for describing the battalion chiefs. But I'm kind of curious about how we're going to staff the 3rd battalion chief position, because Corte Madera has 2 battalion chiefs. Larkspur is contracting for that from San Rafael. Where do we get the 3rd?
So to facilitate this process and make this agreement work, the Larkspur City Council adopted a battalion chief position within our staffing structure, and we've actually assigned one of our captains to serve as an interim battalion chief in this model as we go forward. So the equity would be that Larkspur is providing in this model the chief and 1 battalion chief, and then Corte Madera is providing 2 battalion chiefs.
Great, thank you. And one other question regarding firefighter overtime. It's my understanding that, over the past couple of years, as we've shared positions or shared staff, the agency that is utilizing the services of a firefighter from the other agency who is off duty technically but is collecting overtime, that has been reimbursed by the other agency. I didn't see a provision for that in this draft agreement, so I'm wondering how that would be handled in the future, or really in the next 6 months.
So that's correct. That's exactly how we've handled it previously. We've, depending on the agency that was hosting the opening, we would invoice the other agency for the direct costs of filling that position. Since we have begun to combine the resources of both agencies and actually deploy firefighters on the neighboring agencies' equipment, we now have a situation where we have Corte Madera employees who are staffing Larkspur fire equipment regularly as scheduled and vice versa. So what's ultimately happening is that the overtime that's created, whether it's a sick day or a vacation day or an injury, is essentially the same for both agencies. On average, we're creating the same amount of overtime as we're filling. And so we've gotten to a point through the trust of working together for the past few months where we're going to track for a couple of months without invoicing the other agency the costs and expenses and make sure that they are comparable. And then if they are, we're going to move forward with just an assumption that on whole it will balance at the end of the fiscal year.
Thank you. Kevin?
Just one more real quickly, prompted in part by the terrific maps that you all showed with areas of overlapping services, both between Corte Madera, Larkspur, but also other agencies like the Kentfield Fire District. Have you all had, as part of your process of coming up with the ideas we've been discussing this evening, an opportunity to reach out to Kentfield, for example, and San Rafael, and some of the other local fire departments, just to get their thoughts about what potential impact these kinds of changes might have on their ability to service not only folks within their jurisdictions, but also help us out?
Are you referring to the impacts of a potential station closure, or the
No,
impacts of what we're doing?
It's a more general question than that.
Yes.
Like I said, it was prompted by those slides that did
Yeah.
show the overlap of the jurisdictions and their service capabilities, but it's a broader question than that.
Great question, and yes, we are in close contact with our neighboring agencies. As a matter of fact, for years now, we have participated with our neighboring agencies in a training consortium, and so we are getting together during most times of the year. We're getting together more than once a week with our neighbors, Kentfield, San Rafael, and Marinwood, and training together on a shared curriculum. And in fact, the city of Larkspur currently has shared staffing agreements with both Corte Madera and San Rafael for overtime filling. And so we're partnering already. We're just looking to take the next step at formalizing and expanding what we're currently doing. There's been discussion recently about expanding the previous shared services agreement for trying to reduce mandated overtime staffing. and to have it include all 5 of the Central Marin Training Consortium agencies. And we're going to be discussing that actually on the 14th of this month. That would be a great step forward as well. I have spoken with the chiefs of all of the neighboring departments. They're all very supportive of what we're doing. Specifically, I've spoken with Mark Pomey up in Kentfield about, we currently have boundary drop agreements with them to ensure that the closest units respond to all addresses. So as an example, at the north end of Magnolia, Kentfield is actually a little bit closer to some of those addresses, and that's in play currently, and there isn't any heartburn about what we're doing right now. They're all very supportive.
Thank you. Thank you. Michael?
Okay, so this is my second time around for this. 9 years ago, we spent $5,000 to test the water, and everybody freaked out and ran away. So now we're here, and it's serious, and I'm happy to see that it's gotten this far. So, well, just stick to philosophy. You know, important stuff to me as a public official. And you touched upon it when you, Chief, when you spoke about extra services that we'll be able to provide. Maybe you people don't know, but I started this work here as a volunteer firefighter, which I did for 9 years. I'm a believer, as most firefighters in America are, volunteer fire departments. Most of America is rural and can be served by that kind of fire service. We're different, so we need to have the pros, and I'm all for the pros. However, I'm also kind of an old-fashioned guy, and I like the idea of a fire department being integral to the community and not having sort of this wall between labor and the public. So things like Chipper Day. Corte Madera does a lot of stuff, and Chipper Day is every year. We allow the citizens to bring all their brush and stuff from their yards, and we grind it up for them and throw it away. This is the kind of stuff that does two things. It ties the fire department to the public, and they see our guys working. And it also aids in that WUI problem of that interface with urban and wildland and keep the fuel levels down. So we're actually doing two things. We're doing a service and all that. I fear, and I don't want to fear this, that things like that will go away. I want to really impress on you guys that this stuff is very near and dear to me, as is things like when you guys were in the 4th of July parade. We love that kind of stuff. One thing that we didn't see this year, which was very heartbreaking, is the volunteers' hamburger stand. We couldn't get it together, and I was very upset. And I let my upsetness, I told the guys, you know, this is not okay. We need to stay in front. The volunteers came and went. OSHA came along and said, no, we can't have volunteers. Okay, I understand. It's a brave new world. The lawyers run the world. But now we have apprentices, and I'm a big fan of that Corte Madera is doing. We bring in young men and women who want to become part of the fire service, and we bring them in as apprentices, and we train them, and sometimes we lose them to other departments, but they go off a much better man or woman, properly trained by one of the greatest fire departments that I know of. And so I want to make sure we don't lose that. With all of this talk about labor and all the rest of it, I need to know that there's a place for a young kid living on Christmas Tree Hill, or a young girl that's in Redwood that wants to be a paramedic or wants to be a firefighter, that she can show up at one of our places, and we have a farm league from which we hire the regular staff. So I want to keep that as in play. I know it's not in the MOU, but it's part of the philosophy that Corte Madera has spent many years fostering. And Larkspur too. Larkspur's volunteer force is legendary, but it's gone now. And I don't see any reason why it should be gone, Chief. And not that you made it go away. Okay, you can grab the mic anytime. I'm just venting here a second. And then the other thing is, we have paramedics in Corte Madera. Our engines are what's called advanced life support. When a customer calls, they get a paramedic. And I want to make sure, because that's what the citizens are paying for with their tax revenue, their property tax, that when John Doe calls because he's got chest pains, we get a paramedic on that engine, if that's the first thing that comes in. And then followed by an ambulance, obviously, but that ALS engine is what the citizens are paying for. So if that's too many things, that's all I got to say.
Two things, I can handle it.
Okay.
The paramedic question on the engine company, it's been handled. Within both communities now, because of what I referred to earlier about being able to deploy our resources in as efficient a way as possible with understanding the specialties that are included and the skills that we have on staff, there are now paramedic engine companies in both communities 24/7. This is a success that I am incredibly excited about, and it's happened in the last 30 days, just because of the trust that's been formed and the ability for us to move our personnel into the positions where they'll be most useful for the community. I'm thrilled with it. The staff seems thrilled with it. It does involve sacrifice. I do want to acknowledge some of our staff who have seniority and have, earned the right to work at a particular engine on a particular shift. They have all had to kind of throw their normalcy into the bin here and get mixed around so that it will work, and they've done it willingly and happily because they know that the end result is the best service that we can provide. So I do want to acknowledge the employees for being complete gamers on that aspect of it. As far as the volunteer or reserve program, you answered your own question in a sense by saying that the volunteer programs are slowly going away, and that is not because nobody cherishes them. That is for a number of reasons. One is the training requirements that you also referred to. The amount of mandated training that's required for a firefighter to legally fight fire has become incredible. And to try and keep volunteer firefighters who it's not their primary focus, it's not their career, they all have busy schedules, to try and keep them trained to a level where we can expect them to safely and effectively and legally fight fire is, it became a burden not just on the staff, but on the volunteers themselves. And so we started to see attrition. People, when we put the requirements on, this is what has to happen if you want to be, blessed as someone who's an operational firefighter to be able to fight fire, which is why a lot of the young kids especially got into it. Their other careers and their other things that they're focused on prevented them from being able to train enough. The other issue that is happening is because of the cost of living in an area like ours, we no longer have a large pool of 20-somethings, which is usually what we would rely on for the operational volunteers. They can't afford to live in this area, and if they do live in this area, they're working multiple jobs. And so what we've ended up kind of transitioning to is a reserve program, and that is where a lot of these 20-somethings have decided that this is what they want to do for a career, and so they've already pursued it and gone to a fire academy and earned their Firefighter 1 certification, which is a pretty extensive amount of training and preparation. And if they have that and they've taken the medical training to become an emergency medical technician, then they're eligible to work as a reserve. And that program has been, it has, at once it was called the apprentice program, then it's kind of transitioned into a reserve program. That's been more effective, and the numbers are down, but we do plan to try and look into getting that back up, because you mentioned having it act as a type of farm team, and there's certainly a huge benefit in that, to be able to work with these folks that have already identified they want to do it as a career, work side by side with them and figure out if they're going to be a fit for the department when we have permanent openings. So I hope that addresses what your concern is. Oh, okay.
Can I just elaborate on Michael's,
Sure.
for a second, just to piggyback on Michael's question, because we co-chair the Twin Cities Disaster Preparedness Committee for the last couple of years, which interfaces very well with Larkspur and Corte Madera fire professionals. And I want to echo Michael's comment about how important it is for that community involvement to remain with our fire professionals and our law enforcement. I mean, I think our residents really appreciate that. And to sort of give an example is we agreed as council members just several months ago to hire an individual to be a neighborhood response group coordinator for both of our towns to help in the emergency preparedness of neighborhoods. Actually, Joshua's here. But because we do respect and really appreciate the opportunities for residents to get involved in helping for fire prevention and helping for disaster preparedness. So I look forward to a robust opportunity for a fire marshal or whoever it is to participate more with community because we have more opportunity and resources that way.
One of the added benefits of what we're doing is trying to enhance our public education and disaster preparedness and fire prevention programs, and that hopefully will be addressed through, we have a battalion chief who is specializing in disaster preparedness. That's his background, so he'll be attending those meetings frequently and helping coordinate all of that, and that's one of the goals that we have, increase our involvement with that.
Thank you. Carla?
Excuse me, I have a few comments on the draft agreement, but I'll hold off on those
This
until
is
we
right.
get
This
there.
is intended to be clarification.
Right, but what I wanted to do too, is, as though Michael read my note here, that I too want to echo that we really miss the volunteer fire department. And there's always been, up until just a few years ago, there's always been such a presence of the fire guys at different things, and we really feel that they're such an important part of our community. And so any way that we can recapture that, I really think it would be really necessary for the good of everybody. The other thing I wanted to ask though too is, are now the Larkspur firefighters, are they being required to be paramedics?
We have a number of paramedics on our current roster, that not as many as Corte Madera. But are you asking when we hire new employees, are they required? Or
Well,
we're not requiring that our current employees that are not paramedics go to be retrained as paramedics, but we are, all of our new hires, we are requiring paramedic.
So the reason I ask that is because our standard has been that everyone's a paramedic. And then they're on board with maybe somebody that isn't a paramedic.
Right, so we're doing the same thing at this point where both agencies are hiring only paramedics. Corte Madera retrained a number of their employees a while back, current employees, into the paramedic level. And so most of the Corte Madera firefighters are paramedics. In Larkspur, we're not at the point where most of them are paramedics, but we have a number of them on our staff, and we're only hiring paramedics in the future.
Okay, I was just concerned if, say, an engine goes out and it's all from Larkspur, you're guaranteed that there's going to be a paramedic.
That's right.
On there.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any other clarification questions? Okay. Would any member of the public like to be heard? If so, please step up to the podium and state your name and address and have at it.
Thanks, Michael. Bob Bundy, Corte Madera, and I had been a member of the RVPA representing Corte Madera for many years until Michael to take over. I support what you're doing. I think Jim had a great presentation, and also the rationale for why this needs to happen. The firefighting and police also have just gotten too complex, too involved, and too sophisticated, really, for small standalone departments to manage these programs, and having larger departments with greater resource is really valuable for all of us. I like the idea of continuing the 3 and 2 program from the standpoint of 3-man engine companies within a potentially a battalion chief to back them up. And then paramedic firefighters on the paramedic ambulance. We talked about the possibility that a station could close. One thing that would be an ideal situation for Corte Madera and Larkspur would be to close both 14 and 15 and then create a new station where B&D or B&B Auto is currently located in a underutilized and rundown building. on a nice-sized piece of property. So I'm really supporting what we're doing. I think this is a good step. And the overall goal at this point is not the money that's going to be saved, but the direction that we're going with this consolidation, with improved service, with working more closely together. And what I would like to see is the most rational next step, once things are working smoothly, is to look at a consolidation throughout the Ross Valley with the Ross Valley Fire Department. Kentfield may or not get involved in that, but having a consolidation within the Ross Valley, which is the designated paramedic district, would be a major step in going a quantum leap further from the standpoint of improving efficiency. I think it could potentially get us to the point where we could have 3 paramedic ambulances within the system, and there would be cost savings for all of the agencies, all of the communities, because currently the paramedic tax, $1.5 million of it goes to the county that provides the paramedics on Rescue 14 located in Ross. And that was a great benefit to the RVPA and to the entire Ross Valley when it was first initiated, because there weren't any other paramedics in the system. They were the only paramedics. And now Corte Madera and Larkspur have a lot of paramedics, and the other fire departments, Ross Valley, have also been hiring paramedic firefighters. I think we have enough to cross-staff everyone in there. So next step.
Thank you. Anybody else from the public? Oh, okay.
Sir? Go up.
George, you get, what
Taking
like?
pity on an old person, I appreciate that. I read through the material, so I didn't come here to listen to all of it. You know, I figured I could read through it. I'm curious what has been done or what will be done as part of the process. I look at item 18, which talks about the evaluation, and it has the line in there, improve services and significant long-term economic savings to the public. And I wonder if any information has been gathered as to why other fire departments don't spend nearly as much money as Corte Madera does. I realize there's the cost of the paramedics. I realize that Larkspur doesn't have paramedics on all of their firefighters not paramedic certified. Mill Valley spends approximately $200 less per year per person for their fire department. Larkspur is about $230 less per year. And I just wonder how they're able to do it. And I wonder if maybe looking into best practices of other departments is something that should be maybe spelled out in the agreement or as part of the process, since I see there's a deadline of the end of the year on this for those savings to be identified. Just curious. Thank you.
Just one second. George, thank you. Did you state your name for the record by any chance?
George Topa.
Thank you. You know, to me, it seems like if you're able to provide a response on the spot, it makes sense to just do so right away.
I can't say that we've looked at Mill Valley's numbers particularly closely. We've looked at a lot of aggregate numbers around the county, but comparison of any department, fire, police, planning, public works, across agencies is a pretty significant undertaking, because you're talking about apples and oranges. The way each agency structures their budgets, calculates for the cost of personnel, shows overtime, how overtime is reflected. Actually, between Corte Madera and Larkspur, we just discovered how we show it in the budget is different, and so you have to go into the budget and dig these numbers out. And so it's not a simple exercise to just find some number in the budget and immediately assume they're equal. So I can't say I've gone into the other 9 entities, cities that I might look at to see what their individual costs are. But from a question of have we looked at how other agencies are staffed, very much so. That was one of the assignments to Chief Irving on our request, was to look at what was going on around the county so we could understand what some of these other staffing models were accomplishing. What we have done in our books is work very, very hard to turn apples to apples. So I think today, and as we go forward in this process and give you additional information, we can explain the costs of each agency. And when you start to understand how each agency has accomplished paramedic services, the costs start to come very close together. It has, again, a lot to do with how we are purchasing those services and how we show them in our budgets. And it's not a simple exercise to just open up either one of these budget books and divide by the population of the town, and you get a number that's easily compared to the other agency.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd also just like to add, if you remember the slide that Jim showed that compared the cost between Corte Madera and Larkspur, you do need to look at the net cost to each agency, and when you take into account the income that Corte Madera gets from the paramedic service, the cost per person here and in Larkspur is very similar. As Dan mentioned, we haven't looked at other agencies, Mill Valley for one, but what we're here for and what this is about is to try and reduce costs as much as possible without reducing service.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public?
Hi, Bob Ravazio, Corte Madera. First off, I just want to say thank you to both councils for having a joint council meeting. It's great to see you all in the same room. I think that's something we should be doing more of in the future, not just because of fire, but there's so many things we share in common that we could work together on. I think this is a great first step, so thank you for doing that. And I just wanted to remind all of you of our experience on Central Marin Police. And Todd touched on this as well. The savings that you make in the first year are small potatoes, right? The real savings come down the line. And they come from things that you expect to happen, but more importantly, they come from things that you discover as part of the process. And if you look at the savings that we've been able to generate in Central Marin Police over the years through consolidation, and you imagine those being applied to fire, I think the long-term effects can be huge. Which leads to my second point. This isn't just about reducing cost. This is about better service. And if we're reducing cost and providing better service, I don't know of a better definition of good government than that. That's what we all should be doing, and that's what you should be doing. So I would encourage all of us to continue forward on this, and I thank you for your service, and I thank you for moving forward on this. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Anyone else from the public? All right, before we close public comment, would anybody like to enter into a discussion with our staff before we go any further? You know, I have one question, actually, and that, I don't know if it's Todd or Scotty or who we should be talking about, but I wouldn't mind understanding the sequence a little bit, assuming that as we begin to discuss it, that we, if we decide to move further down this path, I understand tonight what you're looking for is direction from the council jointly about two things. One of them is the memorandum of understanding, and the second one is sort of generally. So I assume what you mean by that is that whether we collectively are in favor of this thing, and if so, generally to move forward. If that's the case, how do you foresee sequentially things happening? I know we have 6 months of a short-term arrangement here, and then what?
Yeah, thank you. So that is what we're looking for, general consensus amongst both councils. And if we have that, the time frame, there's a few things that run side by side. The first one would be as soon as practically possible, hopefully the next Corte Madera and Larkspur Council meeting, to have the shared services agreement on the agenda to have it approved by both councils. Because that gives us the support of what we're trying to do right now. And past that, you can see on page 5 under discussion, there's a number of things that have to take place now, and this is in the public. This is where, as Mr. Topar brought up and others, it's public conversation. It's questions that come up. We have a lot of things to work through, and we're going to do it publicly, and the ad hoc committee is tasked with that. And again, for everybody, the ad hoc committee consists of the mayors, Catherine Way and Sloan Bailey, and council members Larry Chu and Michael Lappert, along with both city town managers. And so that's where we get together. Glenn will be part of that conversation as we go, as well as our labor groups. And we'll start to problem solve those bullet points that you have listed on page 5 and a number of others. And that'll be tasked on a monthly basis. We'll meet and we're gonna problem solve. We're gonna be very thoughtful and we're gonna go through it. And when people bring up great ideas of, hey, this agency does this really well, you need to look at it, well, we're gonna look at it. And we have a time frame. You know, again, the longer you do a shared services arrangement, the more danger you have of things going sideways. For a lot of operational and personnel types of reasons, it makes it difficult for the staff. And so we don't want to do this long term, and so we set a goal of early 2017. We really don't want to get past, you know, early 2017, March, April of 2017. But for all intents and purposes, if we get delayed, you know, if it goes through the fiscal year, we're okay. You know, so we're not set on a 6-month time frame. But in a perfect world for us, knowing of those of us that have been through this operationally, 6 to 8 month window right now of working through the problems with the ad hoc committee, coming up with solutions and ultimately recommendations for both Corte Madera and Larkspur councils. At the same time, over the 6 to 8 month period, the working group that I introduced at the start of the meeting with the help of Glenn, we're going to go through a transition document. So we're going to take both employee MOUs on both sides, and we're going to work our way to a transition document of what the salary benefit package, what that new the new fire department is going to look like. And that's going to take time. And again, we're going to be thoughtful in that. There's going to be a lot of input and direction from the managers as we go through that. And so those two are key critical points. And when we get to the end, when we have a transition document that the managers feel is ready to go before a council, and when the ad hoc committee feels like they've answered all the recommendations for the city and town councils, we will be prepared then to have a consolidation discussion. If we get to that point, we've tasked Tom Bertrand, who's the police authority attorney. He's also the author of our JPA for Twin Cities and Central Marin Police Authority. He is prepared to author that JPA for us if we get to that point over the next 6 to 8 months. And so really that's how we have a lot of work to do in a short period of time, but we're not held to a specific date if we go past that. But we all have to recognize when you share services and you have an MOU agreement, there's a lot of things that it makes it a lot more difficult for the staff to handle it on a long-term basis when you completely merge two agencies like we're working towards right now. And the second part that I really want to touch base on, we focus on big picture things, and we think as a staff, we've checked all the boxes and we've dotted all the I's, and the community and the council, we've answered everything they're possibly going to want to know. And as Councilmember Lappert brought up and Councilmember Condon brought up, it could be something like the points that you brought up that might not be in our top 5 or 6 or 10 or 15 types of issues. The point is, that's how we judge the chief, right? Because, no pressure, but as you go, we have tradition, we have philosophy, we have things that mean so much to us and are important, and we have to recognize, again, we're only as good as our people, and we have to continue the conversation. We're gonna make mistakes, we're gonna take steps back. We might not do something on the 4th of July parade that has been a tradition. You know, we're working our way to it. You have to realize what's on the table here for us. But I'll tell you, sitting in the room with those guys and gals, they pay attention. And we're going to get this right, and we're going to work through the problems together. So it's a 6 to 8 month process, and those two with the working group and ad hoc committee, those are the 2 points really that are before us.
Okay, and let me just one more thing.
I agree.
And can I just give you 1 second? Let me just so at the conclusion of that 6 months, we have a transition document by which we would theoretically walk into a joint powers authority, or no? Is that a different thing? 2 different things.
So the transition document one is you can't have, right? First of all, we have the labor side of having an MOU that's negotiated that the managers agree on that would bring before a council. That has to be done, right? Those are our working conditions. That's everything. So we have to come to an apples to apples, a single document. A lot of times, quite frankly, that's why this doesn't happen. I'm going to tell you that I think we have the right people in the room to make that happen. Hopefully we can do that over the next 6 months.
Okay.
The second part is all the issues of unfunded liabilities, apples to apples. How do we govern? What do we want this new agency to look like for Corte Madera and Larkspur? That'll be the task of the managers and the ad hoc committee to start to work through those issues.
I got it.
So they run parallel, but they'll come together at the same time. You can't come to a JPA agreement for consideration without those two paths meeting at some point.
Thank you. Sorry, Ann, just took me a minute to catch up. Go ahead.
It's nice to hear that we're not in a rush. We're going to take our time on this. I agree with you, Todd. It's a win-win for both cities and for our communities, which is very exciting. And I see the future as Ross Valley Fire Department consolidation. That would be a thrill. When you met with those 4 hours with the employees, what were the concerns with the employees? Just a couple.
I think it's something that the fire departments have talked about for, I know, at least the last 20 years, and it hasn't happened for a number of reasons. And sometimes we're not always communicative, and if you can't fill in the blanks, you'll do it yourself, and it's scary. And so what does consolidation mean? Does that mean, what does it mean? And you fill in the blanks. And so I think what was helpful for all of us is to sit down in the room and to just have an honest conversation and dialogue. And the point was, look, you can't be compared to police or fire or anything else, but you will never have more control in your future of what you look like as an organization and personally than you do today. And so do you want to grasp that opportunity and do something about it and control it? Or do you want to sit back and just let things come your way? And if you do that, this is what our future could potentially look like in Corte Madera and Larkspur. And so we just had an open and honest dialogue. And I'll tell you, we don't necessarily do that all the time in government with our people. And I think it was, from my perspective, and you can jump in, Scott, but it was, I think for everyone, it was eye-opening for me. I think it was eye-opening for the personnel. And by the 4th hour, we were ready to go. We were ready to go. We've talked about this long enough. Let's go. We're not scared anymore. We want to, let's see if we can make this happen. And I think you can see that by all of them here tonight. And it's really amazing. And I got to tell you, you just don't see that with every organization. And it has to do with the recruitment and retention that we've done. And I'm excited, and it's exciting to be part of something that doesn't always happen in government. You know, the easiest things are so difficult. And so I think the morale is high within the fire departments. I think they're excited. And here's the thing, it's not a negotiation. We're problem solving, and they're the ones problem solving. And so they're building the organization from the ground up right now, and they started that a few weeks ago when we started merging the operations. And so it's really exciting to see. But again, to my point, we're going to make some mistakes because we're going to be focused over here, but this tradition right here is very important to us. And so we're not going to miss that, I promise you that. And if we do, then it's going to, at some point, there's going to be a judgment day for us, and that's you. So I have faith in it, and I'm really excited where we're headed.
Kevin?
Yeah, just real quick, and this is actually kind of a footnote, I think, to Sloan's question about process and timelines. Just because the very first paragraph in the agreement does provide an endpoint at the end of the year. So something's going to happen at the end of the year. Either this agreement will have to be extended, or we'll have a joint powers agreement in place. And I assume those are the two options that you're contemplating, as opposed to some other agreement or document that would provide some further transition process.
Great question, and that's correct. We contemplated putting a 12-month period on this and taking it through the whole 16, 17 fiscal year. And I think to be transparent and to continue the steps of the process, which I think is so important, or we think is so important, is to report back at the end of the year to go, look, we're making progress, we think we're checking the boxes, now we recalibrated, we think we need this much more time, or we're ready to go. And depending on where we're at, we could be talking about a JPA at that point, or most likely a slight extension.
An extension of the agreement, or some modification to take into account circumstances that occur at the time. I think it's a good idea, frankly, to have that kind of drop dead point at the end of this year, recognizing that something will probably change, and that's fine.
Carla?
Excuse me, since we're on the draft right now, I have some concerns where I almost feel like we're being pushed to meet this December date. And there's several things that I just don't have resolved in my head. One thing is that when we talk about stations closing, if, for example, it's decided that the station on Magnolia in Larkspur is going to be closed, but there's going to be a new one that is going to be built somewhere, then how does that affect Corte Madera? Is Corte Madera going to be obligated to support a bond measure to build a new facility? And if so, I have concerns with our ratepayers here, with our taxpayers, that they're going to be held responsible for paying for a facility outside of the town. That's one thing. The other thing that I'm not really clear on, just with the graph we have that we were shown here, and thanks for that, Jim, it was just a question that we have $1.3 million reimbursed for paramedic services. And what I'm curious about is what happens to that? What happens to the process where we've always been providing these services and actually getting reimbursements off of it? How then are we comparing apples to apples? Are we going to be in a better financial position or a worse financial position if we abandon that particular service that we've been doing? Another thing that I certainly do favor, getting the 5 people to a fire. I would hate to see the incident commander, the first one in the burning building, and then what are the rest of the people that drive up? What are they supposed to do? So I definitely think that needs to be resolved. Another thing that concerned me was on the shared services of the fire chief. In this draft agreement, as I read it, Scott, you would be accountable to Dan. But then how is Corte Madera left? We don't have any oversight then on the chief. We can't demand any accountability, quality of service, because it all goes to Dan. So I have a problem with that. If it's going to be a shared chief, I think that it should be shared between the town managers and the town councils, both. So that was another thing that really bothered me, that there was no oversight. And I do like the idea of sharing services. I think that is great, and I hope that it would ultimately cut down on the overtime that both departments get charged for. But I'm not still necessarily, would you say, I don't have the understanding that the quality of training is the same in both departments. I don't see that really that's been addressed, except that we're going to do training. But I want to know that Corte Madera is getting the best level of service that they can, and I'm sure that I would share that same feeling with Larkspur, that we really want the optimum quality of service. And where's the parity in that short 5 months of time that we have to more or less a drop dead date on? And I probably have more, but I'll leave you with those right now.
I think those are all excellent concerns, Councilmember Condon, and I want you, if you'll bear with me for a moment. This, for me, it started because Chief Bob Sennett came to me and he said, "Hey, I'm retiring." And within a couple days, I think I called Mr. Brack and said, I'd heard through the grapevine your chief's going to retire in the next year. And wouldn't it be great if we could figure out a way to share a chief and each pay half the cost of a chief? And wouldn't that be a nice cost savings and start a process of working closer together in our fire departments? And Dave said, yeah, I think that'd be a good conversation. Let's have that talk. And once you start telling people you're really seriously thinking about doing that, folks come up and say, well, if you're thinking about doing that, why aren't you talking about doing this thing over here? And why aren't you going to do this? And why aren't you going to do that? And folks like Scott Schertz came to us and said, you know, we're already doing a whole lot of things together, so let's make sure that doesn't get lost in the rent cycle as we talk about whatever partnership we want to have going forward. And all of a sudden, you've got a lot of thoughtful people in the room, and you've got your labor force in the room, and they start saying, this would be a great idea, and that would be a great idea. And it takes on a very organic life of its own. And that's, boy, I cannot see a darn thing.
You might be better off standing up just for 10 minutes.
I might.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll do that.
Yeah.
So it takes on a life of its own. And that's really what's happened to us here. And suddenly you've got Scott Schertz acting on everyone's behalf in the Twin Cities community. And you have Pete Davis coming to our staff meetings and chiming in on Larkspur issues for us. And the other day you had a Corte Madera firefighter, I loved this, driving the Larkspur engine in the parade. Which I thought was fantastic. And I'll tell you the tradition, I don't want to lose Councilmember Lapper. I love when the fire engines switch places. I just think that's one of the funniest and coolest things I've seen in a parade. So I don't want you to take that away, Scott. I don't care who's driving the engine. So my point with giving you some of this context is that we've reached a point where we took our existing cooperation and we accelerated it quite a bit, all on handshakes, faith, and partnership. That starts to create some discomfort with me, with our city attorneys, with folks who do labor law, because CalPERS, labor law, contract law, risk law, they don't like handshakes, and they don't like the idea that you just sort of say to each other, you take care of this and you take care of that. So when we decided we wanted to move this forward by having a cooperative joint command, we realized we needed some level of formality that would protect what we're doing and allow us to move forward with the cooperation between the departments. And so this agreement was designed to give us coverage under employment law, under risk law, under CalPERS rules. And so when you see a phrase like Scott Schertz needs to report to me, that's very specific to ensure we don't run afoul of certain CalPERS rules. And it doesn't reflect the way we're going to do business. We're going to be doing business the way we've been doing it for the last several months. And frankly, I can tell you, Chief Schertz actually, I think, lately spent a lot more time in the office he's been enjoying down here talking to Mr. Brack, and then he's probably been talking to me. And that's okay. That's how this is supposed to work. So I hope you'll take this agreement in the spirit that it was designed by your team, which was more to cover our bases so that these cooperative things we're doing don't run us afoul of any of the agencies we're talking to move the process forward. All of your concerns have to be addressed if we're going to have a final and true agency and partnership. And our intention through the ad hoc committee is to vet many of these issues publicly. For example, what happens to every asset and liability? Both agencies own a lot of things. Do they all just get dumped in a pot, or do they all have to be accounted for? Who owns which buildings? Those are all great questions that we have just started to document and go through and tabulate. And I think your concern about making sure that each engine that's out there, no matter who's on it, has the credentials, the qualifications to serve the public is critical. And I know that all of our staff have been working to make sure that's what happens. But this agreement's a little different than some of the other things that we've ever brought. For example, those of you who work in the police authority, because in the police authority, all that foundation's already there, and we're getting into the minutia. This is the first step to take our partnership to another level. But it's still sort of at that early stage, and this in no way, I think, reflects the level of detail we'll have to go to the finish line.
Can I ask, Dan, do you anticipate that those concerns can be addressed in 5 months' time?
I do, because there's a lot we haven't shown you tonight that we've been doing in the background. We have quite a bit of what a cooperative model looks like on the financial level built out. So we're actually, I think, probably the conversation after we get through sort of the vacation season here, because a lot of our staff's going through its vacation cycle. We probably will start to be assigning values to everything we own so that we start having the asset and liability conversation, which I personally think is the most challenging to finish the process. So we need to start that right away. I have full confidence in Chief Schertz and the whole staff that they're going to resolve any concerns about ensuring that service is appropriate and the best we can offer. I do think one of the more interesting challenges that we're going to have long-term that we won't solve in 6 months is the relationship with Ross Valley Paramedic Authority. And I think we're going to have to devote a whole meeting and session of the ad hoc committee and to the public to what it means to have Corte Madera and Larkspur, who have very similar operational relationships, but very different functional relationships with that organization. We have to figure out what that all means, and as I understand it, we really have to figure that out by 2019 ultimately, because that's when some big decisions for RVPA are on the horizon. So we need to talk about that now. We need to sort some of that out, and then know that we have looming issues however we move forward with this partnership. That's the one outstanding thing that will probably won't entirely resolve in 6 months, is what that relationship with RVPA looks like in 2019.
And what about the town, like you as the city manager, have oversight over Scott?
So that's very specific to PERS law, and similarly, all of the command staff members who are currently Corte Madera employees will continue to report to Mr. Bracken, and then when Chief Cusimano, I guess, becomes Mr. Cusimano, then he has direct oversight under PERS law, because PERS will not allow, PERS needs to see a document that says that a Larkspur employee is reporting to somebody in Larkspur. It's an awkward element of the way we've had to structure the partnership at this time. But to go to the point of formality that I think you have concern about, where we equally would share responsibility over the chief, if we codified that in law, we would have to actually have 2 contracts with Chief Schertz. And that enters us into a layer of complication and complexity that we'd like to resolve over the next several months.
Carla.
Yeah, Carla, let me reiterate that. You know, I share a lot of your same concerns. You probably know that. We've talked. I think back on the police consolidation with San Anselmo, and I addressed the council at San Anselmo once, and they said, you know, this really takes a lot of stars to align for it to happen. And it just, that was the case with San Anselmo, and we had a chief retiring, they had a chief ready to retire. The same thing happened with our fire departments. It does take a lot, and it takes a lot of confidence in the councils to make it happen. But one thing with this agreement is if it doesn't work, it can all come undone. and you need to keep that in mind, and nothing's etched in stone here. As far as Scotty goes, yeah, I was concerned about that. It's paid by Larkspur. He's going to listen to what the Larkspur manager says. But I do want to say, I like Scotty's shirts. I have full confidence in him, and he does keep me informed, and we have a very good working relationship. I'm really happy about that, and I don't see any issues with that.
And I hope the same goes for Scott and Todd.
I want to can I put a disclaimer on the record in case somebody from PERS watches this video? I want to be really clear. I can give Scott direction about the fire operations, although I don't get into the minutia of what the guys do on a day-to-day basis. Dave can do that. That's the agreement allows for that. What that clause means is if Scott does something wrong, I bear the responsibility of dealing with that personnel matter. And if one of the Corte Madera employees does something wrong, Dave Bracken bears the responsibility of dealing with it. That's what that clause means. And so if someone from PERS watches this video, we understand that.
Carla, I echo your interest and concern about quality of our professionals and the quality of training. I think that's a very important thing that we all care about. And I think we also have to keep in mind is that neither one of our fire departments individually are meeting the standards of adequate staffing and adequate ability to respond to the myriad of needs of fire prevention and everything as individuals right now. They don't meet, at this point, any of those standards that Jim outlined as far as having adequate numbers of personnel. So, I mean, if we stay independent, we're going to have to deal with that as far as maintaining the quality going forward, too.
Right, but no, I agree, and that's why I said at the beginning, I like the idea of shared services. It was just questions about the agreement.
Anybody else from the council? Okay, I think it's fair to say that we have a consensus that we ought to, no, go ahead.
Well, I have some comments.
Okay, so I guess we'll close, public comments will be closed. Please come back to the council. Go ahead.
Okay, I just had some comments to make. Thank
Sure.
you. First of all, specifically regarding the draft agreement, I appreciated the answer I got regarding overtime. However, rather than just tracking it for a couple of months, I think it would be worthwhile to track it for the entire term of the agreement. And I think there should be something in there that says that if there is a differential between the two agencies of, say, greater than 5 or 10%, that the agency who has incurred more overtime will be reimbursed for that difference. I just think how overtime can multiply and get out of control. So I think that would be the most fair way to do it. Now, looking ahead, I wanted to suggest that we consider looking at performance metrics of the two fire departments that are existing, as well as what goals we want. And some of those metrics would be suggested by or probably mandated by various agencies. But some of those metrics might be things that the future JPA might just want to see. And again, those could be performance-related things like, response times, staffing, things like that. But they also might be cost-related, related to things like training levels, assets. For instance, making sure that none of the engine stock are greater than X years old, something like that. So I think it would be helpful, again, to come up with base year metrics as well as goals. And then what I would like to see is that the overall, well, not to overuse the word goal, but that the main focus of the JPA be to either maintain or improve the service levels. And I think Michael touched on this a little bit. I'll skip over that. I think decisions regarding facilities, whether we're going to close things, maybe consolidate in a new fire station perhaps halfway between 14 and 15. I personally would like to see those decisions delayed until the new JPA is in place so that we can really kind of get some of the stuff done that we need to get done immediately. I think those kinds of decisions can be made later and probably would best be made by the JPA Council as well as management group.
Diane, I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Then any discussion about facilities, closing a station, maybe closing 2 stations and building a new station, equidistance between those two, something like that. I personally think that those decisions should be made later by the Fire JPA Council and Management Group. I think starting those discussions now over the next 5.5 months could really it would potentially delay the resolution of a JPA. And then, again, I appreciated what Dan Schwartz said about the ambulance service and working with RVPA, because I think figuring out the ambulance service and how that's going to work is going to be extremely important. And I would like that to be part of what you guys look at in the next 5.5 months. And then finally, I just want to thank the management group. I want to thank the firefighter group and the working group made up of council members for all your hard work in getting us this far. I'm really impressed. I also want to thank Jim and Chief Schertz. Looking forward to seeing what you come up with in the next 5.5 months.
Michael?
The only person that said anything about building a new fire station was Bob Bundy. I want the public to understand, we're not building any fire stations, okay? So get that out of your mind. The only thing that was discussed was the possible closure of one based on numerics, and it was alluded to that if we're going to, it would be the downtown Larkspur one, although that hasn't been decided. So that's it. We're not building anything at B&G. We're not doing anything.
I should have clarified that, but my point was those conversations, whatever they will be, later. Thank you.
Would anybody like to say anything? Okay, I would say it's fair to say that there's a consensus among the group that you please proceed with the memorandum of understanding and report back in 5.5 months, and we'll see where we are. Is that fair?
Do we take a vote on that?
I don't believe so. If anybody disagrees with that, please advise. Seeing none, I think our business for today is closed.
Oh, I have a few things.
Oh, please.
I will echo what Sloan Bailey, the mayor of Corte Madera, said, that we have an understanding on his council, and I believe we have an understanding on our council, that this is a very important step forward, and the cooperative arrangement that we've created after many months of working on this, but actually many, many years of this being a conversation between the two towns is very important. And I think we're all focused on making sure that we're providing the best quality service to our residents and our businesses, and figuring out how to be the best fiduciaries of the money that we are all responsible for spending. And I hope we continue to move forward with this. I know our council is very supportive. About 2 years ago, a battalion chief friend of mine at a different agency said it takes 4 parts to this stool. One is the fire personnel, the professionals, thank you. The fire management, it takes the community's support, but it also takes the elected support. And the elected is what's been missing in this dialogue off and on for the last several years, but I think we've got it now. So as representative of Larkspur and our 5 council members, us electeds, are very interested in continuing to work forward with make this to be a success. So thank you for that, and
Great.
I will say yes forward with the MOU.
Gentlemen, good luck and God bless. Meeting's adjourned.